Some commentators maintain that many appear to be unprepared for the AIFMD implementation. From your experience in Malta, what do you believe? What is the situation in terms of local licensed entities, in terms of their preparation for the introduction of AIFMD? And how have such entities started compliance and implementation programs of this directive?
Okay, I think first of all the fund market in Europe and Malta, one of them has been forced to contend with an avalanche of regulation. So besides the AIFMD, there's FATCA, there's MiFID II, Basel III in banking, Dodd-Franks, so a whole host of regulation coming through. And we found that there's a certain level of detachment, I think, when it comes to the AIFMD, particularly because there were more pressing matters in others, like Dodd-Franks and FATCA. For example, we've been more involved in certain FATCA assignments, which were sort of being forced on some of the local licensed entities rather than the AIFMD. That could also be because of the fact that a lot were waiting for the level 2 measures. So perhaps it's understandable. Coincidentally, it's not just Malta in sort of preparation for today. I just went through some PwC websites, and there was a benchmarking survey carried out for asset managers in the UK. And it appears, in fact, that from a survey carried out, this was only 2 weeks ago, or the results were published 2 weeks ago or a week ago, that over 85% of UK fund managers have not yet started any compliance or implementation programs relating to the AIFMD. So I don't think it's necessarily just a Malta scenario. However, it's a bit worrying because time is pressing. There's the July 2013 deadline, I think, as Paul mentioned. So this could be a potential problem because certain of the larger entities, some implementation programs might take months. And the implementation programs impact all aspects of the asset management value chain. So not just the asset managers, I think, as Paul explained. There's the funds and the composition of the boards of the funds themselves, the administrators, the depositories and custodians. So I think it's worrying. As I said, I think the main reason is because a lot were waiting for level 2 measures to be announced. And I think only yesterday, in fact, the Commission published a general update setting out the agenda for regulatory developments. And I think it's stated now that level 2 or an update data for level 2 is going to be given in November 2012 now, I mean in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So hopefully when that's announced, there should be a bit more clarity and perhaps seeing a bit more movement in this particular area.
Thank you. Pony, continuing from Joseph's response, how are service providers from HSBC's point of view preparing for AIFMD? And would you think that service providers will have the ability to respond effectively and in a timely manner to this legislation when eventually it is introduced?
Well, I think all of us are attending a lot of meetings on AIFMD and a lot of briefing sessions. But I think from general discussions I've had with lawyers, auditors, other custodians, other providers, I think the generic view is everyone's aware of the broader implications of AIFMD, and their internal discussions are taking place as to how it will be implemented. But as Joseph said, a lot of them are waiting for what the final law is going to look like before they start drafting legal documents or start changing their procedures or investing in systems, because these will be big investments and big changes, and without knowing what the final rule is going to look like, no one's really moving forward. And I agree with the survey that Josephine mentioned. Is I think service providers are more aware of the implications of AIFMD. I feel fund managers are very much relying on the service providers to come and tell them this is how it's going to impact you and these are the changes you need to make. So I feel there is a little bit of a gap there which needs to be closed. But at the end of the day, in this environment, if the legislation says you need to do X, Y, Z, everyone will have to do it. So the point of will they be able to do it, I don't think they'll be given a choice. They will have to comply.
Puneet, will this new regulation increase the cost of doing business? And if there are increased compliance costs, who will ultimately foot the bill of this regulatory change?
The banker always gets asked questions on cost, right? When they're the ones who charge money. I think the cost of doing business will go up with regulations, and that's not just with AIFMD. With any new regulations that come, there's a cost of implementing that regulations, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be more people to do due diligence, compliance, and not just AIFMD. The whole raft of regulations that Joseph mentioned are coming in and will increase the cost of business. I think that's a given. Who's going to pay for it? That's a difficult question because there will be service providers who will use different kind of commercial tactics to decide how much they charge in the market. What I feel personally is it will become a game of, look, I'm spending so much more to service you, you need to give me more business in order to cater for my costs. So there will be more demand from service providers for a greater share of the wallet if they want the business to be serviced at the same price. Otherwise, the cost of business will go up. And I think in this environment, with cost pressures on every industry player in this industry, the only option you have is to pass it back to the end provider.
Joseph, given Puneet's views that this regulation will undoubtedly cause a hike in costs, do you see, how would you see, if you were to undertake a cost-benefit analysis, would you think that the benefits will outweigh the cost, or will it be vice versa?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question, very difficult to answer. I mean, there's no doubt, as Puneet said, that there's going to be costs across the whole value chain of the asset management service providers and administrators, managers, depositories, and all that. I think there are some bright spots among the grey clouds. I think in particular there is no doubt, first of all, for example, that regulation is moving towards bringing funds onshore. Onshore being sort of the perception being in a more regulated market, and therefore make them more accessible for EU investors in a more accepted sort of regulatory market. Very similar perhaps to the UCITS product stamp. One sort of bright spark, if it transpires that way, is that the AIFM or a fund under an AIFM manager might create a class brand like UCITS did. I mean, there's no doubt, I think, that UCITS has been a particular success within the European Union because it was a well-regulated onshore fund, and that attracted a lot of interest from pension funds, for example, from institutional investors, particularly outside Europe as well, because it was a well-regulated fund. So Asian, even South American investors, the UCITS product stamp was a particularly useful sort of marketing or product stamp. So it could well pan out that, for example, the AIFM branded fund might give that sort of marketing or brand image to a particular fund. Passporting is obviously one of the major advantages being touted around. I mean, at the moment, so any EU fund wishing to market its products in European member states needs to contend with 27 different authorization regimes across the European Union. Once it becomes authorized, there's an automatic right of passport, and the passport is both a manager passport and a product passport. So you have a manager that's able to manage EU funds across all the European Union member states, as well as market those particular funds in every other European member state. So I think those are the particular advantages, perhaps. My personal view, not necessarily that of my firm either, because it's very difficult to see how it's going to pan out. I think that it will turn out to be more like a day like today, which means a lot of grey clouds with very few bright spots. So I think there'll be added costs, burden, and anyway, we'll talk about perhaps the marketability later on.
Joe, if I may just add to that, I think it depends. Benefit is relative. The regulations are focused, specifically AIFMD, is giving investors into funds more transparency, and I think this regulation will give that. Whether that results in greater investor confidence and therefore more money coming in, well, if you see track record, UCITS has proven that when you create transparency, it gives the investor more comfort, and therefore it will come in. So, and a lot of focus is now being put on pension funds as well across jurisdictions. So you might find that this goes down the UCITS route and becomes a popular brand. Some players may not benefit out of it and may not survive this change, but there are others who will benefit. So I think it's relative as to who you look at, who's benefiting from it.
I would add to that I mean, there are some institutional investors that may not need this type of regulations, and these institutional investors would not be happy to pay for the increased costs. In that case, I think there may be cases where we could see funds moving outside Europe. This is my personal view.